This is part 6, right, Daniel? Thank you. Part 6 in a series that I've entitled Life Without God. We've been making our way through portions of the book of Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And we've been with the writer of Ecclesiastes, searching under every rock and behind every tree for meaning and security and significance and those sorts of things. And the book of Ecclesiastes really is a tour of all of the ways that all of us try to find life, happiness, security, peace, all those things apart from God. And this week, I want to look at Ecclesiastes 4. I'm going to read verse 4, and then I'm going to skip verse 5 and 6, and then I'm going to read verses 7 through 12. So Ecclesiastes 4, beginning in verse 4. He says, he didn't say, he wrote, he may have said, and some scribe transcribed it, so either one works. Then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this too is meaningless, like chasing the wind. I observed yet another example of something meaningless under the sun. This is the case of a man who is all alone, without a child or a brother, yet who works hard to gain as much wealth as he can. But then he asks himself, who am I working for? Why am I giving up so much pleasure now? It is all so meaningless and depressing. Two people are better than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person fails, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, two people lying close together can keep each other warm. But how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. So Ecclesiastes is a very bold and honest look, as I said a minute ago, at the ways we try to find happiness and meaning in life apart from God. I've said each week that the subtitle to Ecclesiastes could easily be The Search, because the writer is constantly searching high, searching low for that thing that seems to be missing, trying to fill that void that he senses. He's not alone. All of us spend our lives trying to fill voids. We use relationships to make us feel less lonely. We use work to make us feel more accomplished. We use education to make us feel smart. We use pleasure to make us feel alive. We use romance to make us feel loved. We use sex to make us feel desired. We're constantly searching to find something that will land. We're on this constant search for that missing piece of the puzzle that we can sense but can't fully identify. That's the human condition. All of us spend our days doing that, whether we realize it or not. Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes is on the hunt. He's trying to fill a deep void that he feels, and he's honest about it. He talks openly about it. He admits it. He begins many of his paragraphs by saying things like, I have seen, I have tested, I have discovered, I have experienced. He's slugging his way through life, desperately looking for something to make him feel alive, something that ultimately matters, something that will ultimately satisfy. And what he concludes over and over again is that everything and everyone in this world will fail you in some way and at some point. All ground is sinking sand, he discovers. Relying on an achievement, an experience, a person, a dream, basically anything under the sun, to be our ultimate source of meaning and purpose and identity is literally like building a house on the sand. He says it's like chasing after the wind. Chasing after something that can never be caught. He uses that phrase, chasing after the wind, a lot because that's what it feels like to him. It's what it feels like to us. Well, we've already looked at how he tried to find life apart from God in pleasure, in wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom, in accomplishments. Last week, we looked at how he tried to find life apart from God in making the best use of his time, and how all of those avenues left him high and dry, unsatisfied ultimately. Well, this week, he looks at the meaningless of competing to find ultimate meaning. I was thinking about this yesterday, that I'm assuming that when most of us think of competitive people, we think of that guy in high school or that girl in college or that annoying coworker or my older brother or Michael Jordan or Tom Brady or somebody like that. But the truth is, we are all inescapably and unavoidably competitive. I've thought a lot about this week. In fact, Stacy and I were talking last night at dinner, and I said, I don't really have to spend a tremendous amount of time exegeting or exploring every human heart to know what to say on Sunday mornings. I just need to spend enough time exegeting and excavating my own heart, because I don't think we're all that different. I think our circumstances may be different, personalities may be different, but I think in reality, all of us suffer from the same things like fear, insecurity, sense of hopelessness from time to time, things like pride and misplaced ambition, all of that stuff. And so I spent a lot of time this week examining my own heart to see what kind of competitive threads I could discover. And what I discovered was somewhat sobering, but I think in the end, helpful. Now, I need to start by saying that competition in itself is not wrong. I mean, a certain amount of competition can push us and make us more productive than we would otherwise be. The problem, and this is the problem he addresses here, the problem is that when we try to live without God, which, by the way, all of us do, whether you realize it or not, when we try to live without God, competing becomes a subtle, almost unconscious way that we gauge our worth, that we gauge our value. If I can get ahead, if I can be the one who is noticed, if I can be the one who is most appreciated, most loved, most respected, then I'll matter. Winning becomes a way to gain approval, to forge an identity. The Oxford American Dictionary defines compete this way: strive to gain or win something by defeating or establishing superiority over others who are trying to do the same. That's the way the Oxford American Dictionary defines compete. In 1,000 ways, 1,000 different ways, we try to establish superiority over other people who are trying to establish superiority over us. It's an incredibly subtle but cruel game that nobody wins. Everybody loses this game. We all compete, always. Always. I was somewhat startled, stunned, even embarrassed to look deep into my own heart and discover the ways in which I am unavoidably competitive. We compete with our spouses. We compete with our children. We compete with our parents. We compete with our friends. We compete with our coworkers. We compete with strangers, enemies, our neighbors, you name it. We even unavoidably compete with ourselves. We are natural-born competitors. It is wired into our DNA, and it's unavoidable, but the more we can acknowledge, admit, and see that we are all natural-born competitors, then we at least have a chance of mitigating the being overrun by our competitive drives, by our competitive spirits. This competitive nature all started in the Garden of Eden with our desire to compete with God. That was the temptation. It wasn't a particular fruit. That wasn't the primary temptation. The temptation was, you can be like God. And so all of this started a long time ago, before any of us were born, and we inherited this competitive drive. In order for us to feel good about ourselves, we work hard to establish position. We compete to be right. We compete to win. We compete to be the smartest. We compete to be the most respected. We compete to be the most in the know. We compete for affection. We compete for attention. We compete for approval. We compete in conversations all the time. All the time. I was having a conversation with my brother yesterday, and I was in the thick of sermon prep. And my youngest brother called, and he's tried to call a few times this week, and I haven't been able to answer, so I picked it up, and what I thought would be a 5 or 6 minute conversation ended up being an hour-long conversation, which is always enjoyable with this particular brother. And it was stunning to me how often in our conversation I was able to detect my own competitiveness, not because we were jockeying for position, but because when he would tell me about something he was going through, I would almost instinctively bring it back to something that I was going through. And because I was in the thick of studying this stuff, I was like, holy crap, dude, you're doing it again. I mean, you're doing it right now. We do this all the time without realizing it. Every time we bring the conversation back to ourselves for whatever seemingly justifiable reason, it is an expression of our competitive spirit. Always. In that moment, we are vying for some kind of twisted attention. We want the focus to be back on ourselves for some reason. We compete all the time. We often feel like we have to get the last word. I'm less interested in hearing your point as I am in making mine. We do this in conversations all the time. Test yourself, okay? This afternoon, tomorrow, test yourself. See how often we do this. We exaggerate our lives all the time. We either exaggerate that things are better than they are, or we exaggerate that things are worse than they are. We inflate our accomplishments. We drop names. We show off in different ways. We compete for other people's time. We compete against time itself. We talked about that last week. We compete for pity. We compete for sympathy. We not only compete with other people regarding whose life is the best, but also whose life is the hardest. You know those people, you always ask them, so how's it going? And all they have is a slew of terrible things going on in their lives. And while those terrible things may be sad and true, you almost get this sense that, there's absolutely nothing at all that is going well in their life. They compete for pity, for sympathy. Siblings compete with siblings. Husbands compete with wives. Wives compete with husbands. Spouses compete with each other for who the kids like most. Okay? I could go on and on. I could spend the next 45 minutes just going down the list that I discovered in my own heart yesterday. We are natural-born competitors. And an unbridled, undetected competitive spirit ruins relationships, smothers them, in part because it crushes our ability to celebrate someone else's success, to cheer other people on. It stymies our impulse to encourage in a particular moment. We're afraid to lose. We're afraid to be outshined in some way. When we conclude that our worth requires winning, attention, being the one who is noticed and loved, it prevents real friendship, and life becomes very lonely, which is what he addresses in verses 7 and 8 and verses 13 through 16. Some of the most competitive people I know are also the loneliest. When I'm being uber competitive, I'm lonely in those moments. I have to win. It's not about connecting with this person, celebrating this person, listening to this person, encouraging this person, being there for this person. It's about what I can get out of the moment to get me ahead in some way, shape, or form. The ones who have the fewest friends, I've discovered, are the people who are most competitive, the ones who are most closed off relationally, always have their guard up. They keep people at arm's length because everyone is a potential threat to the attention they need, to the affection they're vying for. There is not an area in our lives where we aren't competing in some way and at some level, and it's one of the reasons that we're so tired. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons that we're so exhausted, we're so tired. And this is what he laments, the writer laments in verse 4 when he says, "Then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbors. But this, too," he says, "is meaningless, like chasing the wind." He sees the vanity, the meaninglessness in one-upmanship. It's easier to catch the wind than to find ultimate meaning in competing successfully. Well, if this is all there is, if there is no God and life under the sun is all that there is, then winning becomes another burdensome self-rescue project. If it's all up to you to do whatever it takes to ensure that you get ahead, that you win, then you're engaged in a burdensome self-rescue project, one that is guaranteed to fail. And those of us who are self-aware know that to be true because we've tried. Time and time again, we've tried. Whatever approval, value, or significance we crave, it's all up to us to get it if life under the sun is all that there is. It's the do more, try harder approach to life, and it leads to despair, and it leads to exhaustion. Years ago, in Vogue magazine, Madonna was interviewed. And what she wrote has stuck with me for years because it was so honest, so self-aware. She said, "I have an iron will, and all my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, and then I get to another stage and think I'm mediocre. Again and again this happens. My drive in life comes from this horrible fear of being mediocre, and that's always pushing me. Because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove that I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will." I mean, Madonna's more honest and self-aware than most of us to even be able to say that, to admit that about herself. She admits that she hasn't gained the validation she craves, so she keeps pressing. I mean, some of the highest achievers I've ever known are the most enslaved to the spirit of competition. And oftentimes they're competing with themselves. One of my favorite movies, probably top 10, which is a whole nother sermon at some point, top 10 movies. Not for any spiritual reason, just because I like to talk about movies, okay? God may or may not even come up in that sermon series. But in all seriousness, one of my favorite movies, top 10, my parents made us all watch it when it came out in 1981, was Chariots of Fire. There are some scenes in that movie that are gripping. It's the story of, it's actually a parallel story of Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams leading up to the 1924 Olympics. Eric Liddell was a devout Christian whose parents were missionaries in to China. They were Scottish missionaries to China. And he had a girlfriend named Jenny, and she was very devout. And she would oftentimes get very confused by Eric Liddell's drive to run and to compete. And after church one Sunday, it's a super powerful scene. After church one Sunday, they're walking in a field, and she essentially brings this up. Why are you so obsessed with this, running? Don't you know that God has made you for a higher purpose, to go, like your parents, to China to be a missionary? And he was so kind and tender in his response, but he stopped and he turned to face her and he said, Jenny, God has made me for a purpose, China, but he's also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. So good. It's not the point of why I brought that up, but it's an incredibly powerful scene. But the scene I'm referring to, that I'm getting ready to refer to, is a scene of Harold Abrahams, who was not a Christian. He too was competing in the 1924 Olympics. And there's this scene right before the final race where he'll be competing for the gold medal. And he's getting massaged by his trainer. And he says this to him in a moment of real sobriety and honesty. He says to his trainer, I used to be afraid to lose, but now I'm afraid to win. In an hour from now, I will be out there again. I will raise my eyes and look down that lane, 4 feet wide, with 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. But will I? He's giving voice to the way most of us feel a lot of the time. The emptiest, as someone once said, the emptiest moment in life is when you've just accomplished what you thought would deliver the ultimate and it has let you down. Feeling the need to justify yourself by ending up on top, by getting the win, whatever the win may be in any given moment. Oftentimes, the need to win comes in conversation with those closest to us. But feeling the need to justify ourselves by always getting the win, by ending up on top, it's a heavy way to live. And we weren't meant to carry that burden. Fearing loss, fearing rejection if we don't sufficiently impress, drives us to lie, cheat, and steal in a variety of ways. So as I was exploring this all week, really, but yesterday in depth, I was forced to ask, what fuels this competitive drive that we all have? It's one thing to acknowledge its existence, but to get under the surface and go, what is it that fuels this? What is it that primarily fuels this competitive spirit, this competitive drive that enslaves us so often? And I went through a variety of different possible answers to that question in my own heart and mind. I think what drives it is our desire to be approved, our desire to be loved, our desire to be respected. All of that is true, yes, but then I had to go a little deeper. But why do I desire to be approved? Why do I desire to be validated? Why is that even there? And I had to go a little deeper. And I came up with one word. What is it that ultimately fuels this competitive drive? Unbelief. It's that simple. We simply don't believe that we are already justified by God, so we spend our lives trying to justify ourselves. We simply don't believe that all of the love and approval and validation and justification that we long for is already ours. Instead of believing that our identity is already firmly established by God, we seek to forge our own identity by what we can secure for ourselves. Unbelief. We don't believe that we are loved, approved, forever made right and justified by the only person that ultimately matters, namely God. And so we undergo these identity crises because our identity is not firmly placed in God's love for us, and so we seek to forge our own identity by what we can do for ourselves, what we can secure for ourselves, and it never works. Never. I read an old essay last night in the New York Times by a writer named Benjamin Nugent. And like Madonna, he was super honest about his own struggles. An accomplished writer, a great writer. But he wrote this: "When being a good writer was my only goal in life, I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth. And for this reason, I wasn't able to read my own writing well. I couldn't tell whether something I had just written was good or bad because I needed it to be good in order to feel secure. I lost the ability to cheerfully interrogate myself, to see what was actually on the page rather than what I would have liked to have seen on the page or what I feared to see on the page. In other words, when you make anything your identity, when you make your career your identity, or a particular body your identity, or a particular love relationship your identity, those things stop being good things and they start to crush you. In other words, I wanted to write, and that's a good thing. But when the writing was my identity, when I made the quality of my work the measure of my worth, and I couldn't actually look at it realistically, and I certainly couldn't handle any criticism, that's when my identity crisis began." I mean, that's honest. Super honest. He's talking about a skill, a work, a gift, but we could apply that in 1,000 different ways. I have to be the best mom. I have to get married if I'm going to count. I have to have children. I have to be desired and loved. I have to have the esteem of someone that I esteem. I want the affection of this particular person. I need the affection. I need to be more important to this person than that person is. I mean, we do this all the time. When you feel, and his last line was so incredibly powerful, when your identity is misplaced the way he describes here, you're almost unable to handle any kind of correction or criticism. You can't handle it. When you feel the impulsive need to defend yourself against any and all criticism, it's proof that you've built your identity on needing to be right, needing to be good, needing to be better, needing to be a winner, needing to be thought of in a particular way. We are, oh my gosh, are we defensive? I mean, we are amazingly defensive. As I've said before, we are all amazing judges when it comes to the flaws of other people and amazing attorneys when it comes to our own flaws, self-defense attorneys. But the fact of the matter is that no identity is secure unless it's built on God's never-ending love for you. Because building your identity on anything less than that is like building your house on the sand, chasing after the wind. So this is kind of the way I landed yesterday. What we want, what I want, and I think it's probably what you want too. I think it's what we all want. What we want is the adoration of someone we esteem. We want to be noticed and loved by someone important, someone impressive, someone that we look up to. And the gospel declares that we have been. The gospel announces that you have nothing to compete for, that everything you're trying to win has already been won for you. Attention, approval, affection, validation, worthiness, freedom from the pressure of competition happens when we realize the thing we are competing for has already been secured for us. It's the entire purpose of Jesus coming and bridging the gap between us and God. He came to secure for us what we have tried and tried and tried for thousands of years to secure for ourselves, to no avail. And as this good news begins to grip your heart more and more, your need to win weakens. And when your need to win weakens, the things that matter most in life get stronger. Your relationships get stronger. You don't need to win this moment. You don't need to win this conversation. You don't need to win over here or over here. You don't need to get in the last word. You don't need to bring the conversation back to yourself, your own pains or your own successes. You don't need to do that. You're free from that. So as your need to win weakens, the things that matter most in life get stronger and stronger and stronger. You begin to feel freer to celebrate others, to encourage other people's success, to defer, to admit that you're not everything you want other people to think you are. That's incredibly freeing. So the good news is this, and I'll finish here. Because Jesus was strong for us, we're free to be weak. Because Jesus succeeded for us, we're free to fail. Because Jesus won for us, we're free to lose. All of the meaningful competition that needed to happen has. And the spoils, the victory of that win are inherited by us because someone else ran the race. Let's pray together. God, an important part of knowing you is knowing ourselves, becoming increasingly aware of our condition, which makes us increasingly aware of the grace we need and the grace you've already given us. And so I pray that you would help us to believe the gospel. It is a daily struggle. It's a daily grind to believe that all of this is true. We're skeptical. It sounds too good to be true, but it is, and we need you to help us believe it, moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. So give us the gift of faith so that we might be increasingly set free. And we pray these things in Jesus' name.